Good afternoon, welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon as we get into our second webinar. This time on data helps operators find and fight theft. The goals for today's webinar are to answer the following questions. What data types should I follow in order to prevent theft? Why should data be part of every loss prevention plan? How can following the right theft metrics save you time and money? Why does data analytics play a key role in preventing future theft? Our agenda for this afternoon looks like this. Additional thoughts before we get started, just some general comments on theft and loss and a little bit of information back from our previous webinar. POS theft, as seen in your cost of goods, data points around cost of goods that can help you monitor your performance and identify trends. Negative trend rather, and the potential theft, data points for POS and theft-related issues. And then throughout today's webinar, you'll be seeing references on thresholds and goals, tracking trends, and anomalies. And then we'll have a recap at the end and talk about setting goals and favorite questions and comments. So opening thoughts, as we get started here, some things to think about as we're working through the slides of the webinar. Analyzing data is time-consuming, but very necessary. It's a key component in the loss prevention program in understanding what's happening and getting in front of things before they become issues. So think about analyzing data as checks and balances in your business. Someone at the store level, the officer level, needs to own the data, process the tracking, follow the rating and calibration. Important to know that as we pull these three lines together, there's a silver bullet here. There's a great web-based and manual tracking system that you can use, follow on and track your data. Troubleshoot. Somebody has to do the work, so it's investment in time by somebody on the team, store level, and so on. Regular data checks into your schedule, very important. The more effective the store level team is in executing your brand standards, daily, weekly, periodically, the better. It'll keep you out of investigations for something we spoke to in our previous webinar. Understanding numbers for what they are. We would see emotion comes with performance and non-performance. And we'll elaborate on that thought here for a moment. Oftentimes we see trends that suggest poor performance or maybe validated or even theft. And it might be somebody that we didn't necessarily expect it to be from one of our best performers or perhaps a long-term performer. And we have a hard time accepting that because of the relationship we have to the potential overall performance. So understanding the numbers for what they are, looking at the data and let that speak on its own to help you separate whatever ownership you have of the individual and the emotion that comes along with that relationship you've had over time. Systems, one of the definitions and applications that I've used over the years, a method of regularly inspecting what you would expect. So you think about it in these terms, you've got various things that you complete on a daily and weekly basis at the restaurant, and having tracking systems in place to understand trends is simply a method or a system of regularly inspecting what those results are supposed to be relative to your targets over time. And then doing differently than you're doing them now. Hoping that there's takeaways from what you see today, maybe not new data or new applications, but just a different way to look at the data. Something you can think about here in the next day or two, and then start doing something differently from a data tracking, data collecting, or data analyzing standpoint. So let's get started into POS as seen in your cost of goods. And I want to start off by saying that if you're identifying theft in a cost of goods report, it's way too late. Typically, your cost of goods reports are seen on a weekly basis by virtue of a variance report or end of period in your numbers, or when the P&L is generated, oftentimes 2-3 weeks after the period ends. If it's reached a point that you've identified your theft, then you're going to have some issues in terms of identifying what the problem is. And a reminder here, rather than you see in the slide, lost revenue, increased costs, obviously, and then because of the food served and the labor prepared the food, and the money has not made it to the register. So at this point, you're looking at your cost reports, and you've identified theft because your cost is too high for whatever reason. And if you reach that point, you're really fighting whack-a-mole through several different processes, trial and error, and trying to understand where the theft occurred and why. I'm going to share with you here shortly some systems you can use on a weekly, daily, and period basis to help you identify trends early and then have yourself in a great prevention situation. So store level COGS really starts with taking the variance reports. And on the slide here, you see critical queue, accuracy, and no bounce back. So from a daily perspective, it's very important that you select, in my view, the few items that really impact your cost of goods. And we're talking about proteins, the higher cost items, somewhere between 6 and 10 items, depending upon your brand. And that's accurately inventoried, so the variances are true and accurate, one way to the max. And then one other comment on that is you see that this word is no bounce back. If you find yourself or someone on your team using the word bounce back as it relates to inventory or even cash, that's something that we would stop to. It takes away the accountability and ownership, the numbers, and that's not a place you want to be in excusing away variances. And oftentimes, when you see issues here that are going to cover up that bounce back is the first thing that somebody will lean on. And then weekly variance reports, again, complete. This would be full inventory of all your food items, accuracy. The same thing holds for weekly as for daily, and the same comments on the bounce back commentary and excuses. Just don't let that be part of your operation. Transfer reports, critically important from a data point perspective as it relates to your COGS. May help you monitor the product coming and going from your restaurant, and more so making sure that all of the transfers are legitimate. We have several examples over time where transfers have taken place where the product is missing, and the manager transfers the product out to reduce from their inventory. However, when the P&L comes out, you're going to see that the product still there in terms of your costs, even though the variance report will be reflective of a favorable number. So you want to be sure that the transfers are accurate and that they are real, that you in fact do not have ghost transfers. Period inventory results, each brand has some sort of system in place to measure the cost of goods, of course, the period or month, whatever your calendar, your period calendar or monthly calendar is. In Taco Bell world, we call that the period end inventory, and I've got some examples I will share with you here shortly. Beverage and cost and beverage and paper cost targets are reciprocal in your cost of goods. And then we're going to look at two examples, one calculating tracking and trending days inventory, and then another example of inventory turns, increasing inventory with steadily improving product experience. So the last two lines, both excellent methods to monitor your inventory from one period to the next and help you identify early if you've got inventory issues related to theft. So let's start by looking at beverage, and this is critically important because your product may be in order, but you may have an issue in this case with beverages. So what we're looking at here is the beverage section of a Taco Bell period inventory report different brands, as I call this, maybe something different, but all the data would be there for whatever period of time you're looking for, the period or month, whatever the process is that you use. Typically, when I look at beverage costs, I'm looking at somewhere between 3 and 4%, and there's even exceptions within that range. But generally, in the 3.5%, 3.75% range is a good place to be for beverage, and certainly for this particular representative that we're looking at that is a non-incentive report. And we're seeing a beverage cost of 4.78%. And so there's one of two things going on with this beverage number. There's either A, too much product on the shelf at the period end, which is costing your organization from a cash flow standpoint, tying up money where it shouldn't really be on the shelves. And two, it could be a theft issue. So this is a number that you would want to watch, and you would want to monitor from one period to the next. And this is what with paper costs. The numbers are a little bit different. I use 2.5%. That would represent a high-end paper cost or a high-end restaurant, and probably more in the middle, lower volume, or moderate volume restaurant. This restaurant we're looking at is a high-volume restaurant, and looking at a 3.16 paper cost, which it may be right, it may be legitimate, but could be a situation with too much of the wrong product on the shelf, too much product on the shelf, or we have a theft issue in play here. So that 3.16 number we need more tracking and looking at it over time, so you've got something to compare it to one period to the next. Inventory alerts, and this is the last stage of a period inventory report for the same stock level we're looking at. And at first glance, the numbers that are highlighted here to the right, we see three numbers. We see a food cost of 21.8%, which looks great. You see 6.05 for beverage and paper together, that also looks great. And therefore, 27.33% total cost for this given period look great. Certainly not the low world. But is that number correct? By doing the following two steps, you have a better opportunity to understand if that number is correct or legitimate. So the first thing that we look at is these highlighted numbers at the bottom. The 5666 is the beginning inventory, and then the 5497 is the current inventory. It's really important that you monitor these two numbers, and this is something that a restaurant general manager or whoever is responsible for the period of numbers should be doing as part of the routine. Those two numbers should be relatively close to each other, one period to the next. One of the keys to maintaining sound cost of goods is to maintaining an even inventory, one week to the next and one period to the next. So you look at these two, and they're pretty close. The variance that I like to see is somewhere between $300 and $500 each period. If you're bouncing back and forth between the number and the neighborhood, I think you would bounce back and make sure you guys have to. But if you're in that area with $300 or $500 up and down each period, you're in pretty good shape from an inventory standpoint. And then you see the 30,726 and 17 cents is the total cost. So remember that number and we can to the next slide along with this 5497, which is the ending inventory. When you use those to calculate what we call the days in inventory. And this is the total number of days of product that you have on your shelf to serve guests. Just in terms of dollars, the product on the shelf. So you use the amount of dollars you have on your shelf. So the beginning inventory and the current inventory, as I mentioned, should be relatively close to each other. To calculate the days in inventory, we have the current inventory dollars, remember it was $54.97, and we have the COGS dollars for food, $30,726. So you divide the current inventory into the COGS, and you get a factor of 0.1789. And that doesn't mean anything until you multiply it by, in this case, 28 days, because Taco works on a 28-day period. If you're on a calendar month for your accounting purposes, you would multiply that factor, that 0.1789 factor, by 30 days, 31 days, depending on what month you're in. But in this case, we're 28 days, so that factor times 28 days equals 5 days of inventory in hand. And typically, that's a pretty good place to be, remembering that that number will be influenced by delivery day, volume, case count, also a victim of case count, but really the low volume every time. So in a situation where you have a lower medium volume restaurant that might be receiving a delivery in the same day that you're taking inventory, their days inventory might get up as high as 8 or 9. The key in this is that you set goals on a store-by-store basis, and it can be different or will be different for every store, and then you're monitoring the trends over time. And I can't stress that further that this is enough. So this is an example of days in inventory tracking, and this is a manual calculation. I've used this for a long time. And you see here over 6 periods, I keep this for running 13 typically, but the example here is 6. Period 5 is acceptable at 5, period 1 is acceptable at 5 days. Period 2 is at 7 days, and that might even be okay, but you still want to do your diligence and your follow-up, because you see what's happening here in period 3, 4, 5, and 6. We've gone from 5 to 7, which those two may be normal, it may be growing, but we know for sure at 21 days at period 6, there is an issue. Might be an inventory issue, but when you're looking at steadily improving inventory, days inventory, as an example, you've got a manager or management team that is manipulating the inventory to cover theft. Another way to look at this, and this is actually a web-based tool. This comes to us from us here at Delegate. And this is, there's 3 things going on in this slide. We see 4 periods, in this case 3, 4, 5, and 6, of steadily improving product variance for rifles. Then we see the same period, again, the inventory is growing in dollars. So when you're in a situation when you're tracking and you see ICOs improving, getting better, and inventory is growing, that is a red flag. They're manipulating the inventory to cover for the cost of variance. You got to be very careful here. The other thing is this 3.5 number for inventory turns. That's telling us that this restaurant is turning the complete food inventory over 3.5 times in a period. That's on the low end. The higher the better, the lower the more question there is about the integrity of the inventory. So the number here was born on inventory by somebody other than the general manager, another artist from another restaurant, or leader, perhaps a key person. There's something going on in these numbers that would suggest that there's unfortunately, as I mentioned at the beginning, now if this is the first that we're realizing this, we're at least 3 periods into it, and we've got a bit of work to do to investigate and find out what the heck is going on here. So, moving on to the POS and cash side of the business, away from COGS. Protected sales and cash with data points is what we'll get started on here. Talking about store level cash, there's a comment here. Studies have shown, some of you may know this, professional thieves steal on a budget. Daily, weekly, periodically, they know exactly how much they want to take, how much they need to take, how they're going to get it, when they're going to get it. And you can help protect yourself by having systems in place to monitor everyone's performance equally, so you can identify and correct in more immediate fashion. POS register takes cashier reports, your first data point here from a control standpoint, whether they're automated through a back-of-the-house system or manual processing paperwork like we've done for years and years in this business. The one thing that both of these formats have in common is there is a register flow, a shift flow, if you will, that comes off of the register system, the POS system, at the end of the employee shift and at the end of the business day. And that's a critically important data point to understand what's going on with cash in your business in general. Transaction compliance, cash management is a loss prevention tool, web-based solution here at Heskett that does a lot of the work for us. Cashier performance log is a manual tracking form that we used for years and years in the world. We would track the POS from the cash register, from the cashier's performance as we were filling their paperwork and then tracking that over time to, number one, let them know where we were looking, but put us in a position where we could understand trends and protect our sales for cash. Car users, if you happen to be one of the organizations or your restaurant, understanding what the incident reports look like and the day reports. The number on these reports can actually be entered in Taco. We've identified that in the past, those numbers have been manipulated, and that's a bad place to be. So this is an excellent data point. I can compare your safe local reports against your back of house restaurant reports and making sure those things match. Shift change documentation, another piece of important paperwork, understanding what's happening and how frequently the safe is being audited and by whom when you are changing the manager in charge one shift to the next. Validated deposit slips, another great data point to make sure that we are validating before we leave the bank that the money that's deposited in the bank and validated on that slip matches the amount on the deposit slip. And then the weekly schedule, we touched on this during our previous webinar, and following on the scheduling and then appointment to make sure that we have the proper number of cashiers deployed, and we will go back and verify if we're in an investigation who is scheduled to work with registers against the actual registered is not and why the issue may have that. So our first data point is mentioned on that slide, and one of them is the actual registered paid POS settlement that comes out at the end of the cashier shift. And you'll see the point on the previous slide that I'll make it as we're looking at this one. Typically, the manager in charge, the manager that's doing the banking, the settlement of the door, they're looking, because they're in a hurry, perhaps they're inexperienced, they're looking at this number rated, highlighted, or underlined, better, at $1,069.54. How much cash am I supposed to have to get the cashier settled? And they're overlooking all of the other critical information on this tape. And when I say they're overlooking, I'm referring to lesser experienced folks, assistant managers, shift managers, people that have been doing it all too long, maybe not all that skilled at it, maybe don't know what all of this means. And quite frankly, they're handling 2/3, in some cases 80, 90% of our business. And this task, and they're missing the opportunity to catch these numbers and coach at the time that they occur. So looking at this real quickly, I would tell you this is a late night manager's shift from about 9 o'clock at night, closed or open very late. And you look at the data that's on this tape, we see meals 29, 46, 48. That seems rather high to me for a drive-through door late night. Deletions at $107. And then you see we wait for $3.20 of this $29 meals. We have none of them. So what does this look like as we get into details? As I mentioned, typically the manager in charge focuses on that one number, that cash accountability number, how much cash am I supposed to have? What else is the state telling us? Deletions in this example are acceptable from a dollar and percent standpoint. $107 deletions and $200 for 4.5%. That's actually pretty solid. But is it? We've got a tenured manager on the door. You need to understand that. This is where a web-based solution will help you when you can drill down into the transactions to understand when the deletions took place and what they look like. Overrings and voids, there was one for $3.20. Is a documentation for it. It's always a question when it comes to overrings, voids, and refunds. And then the discount is there's a documentation in place. In this case, there's 10 meals for $29.48. What do they look like? We need to see the documentation to understand that. So you pull all this together, you should have this particular register tape, should have one void documentation, which would include the void and the original receipt, and then it should have 10 receipts with the discounts on it. If they don't, then it's time to do the training or maybe the documentation with the manager, between the manager and the cashier responsible for this. And also an opportunity, if this was the higher manager in leadership, to do that coaching as well. So accountability for the cashiers and the fees. Store level compliance is a must. I mentioned at the beginning that the better the stores execute the brand standards on a daily basis, certainly on a shift basis, the better standard you're going to have from a loss prevention standpoint. So handle missing documentation like missing cash. In this example, between the void and the discounts, it's $32 in documentation. If all of that or any of that is missing, the cashier and the manager in charge should be held responsible for that. I like the missing documentation to missing cash. So tying that together, let's assume all this documentation is in place and the drawer is $30 short. I'm betting that we would hold that cashier, bring that manager in charge. In this case, it is the manager responsible for some sort of documentation and maybe separation, depending on what kind of documentation they have in the file for previous losses and neglected procedure. So sending a message to the management team, everyone that handles cash, they will be held responsible for documentation. If those missing cash, send a strong message, and it's a great way to correct the documentation piece for void deals and protect your metrics and your profitability. And then ask yourself, what role does the MIC have in all of this? The MIC is responsible, the manager in charge is responsible for controlling the ship. Typically, the manager in charge or another manager is responsible for handling the discounts and the refunds. They're generating the receipts. If those are missing, it's a shared responsibility between the cashier and the manager in charge. Talk a bit about trending and comparisons. Trends can only be identified through tracking, whether it's manual or web-based solution. I mentioned earlier cash performance logs that we used years ago, tracking metrics by cashier over time. What you see here to the right is a screenshot of our guard product. Here I'll get the measures cashier's performance, and I'll do more on that down the line. Web-based programs that do work for you, they're great. In that regard, there's no tracking, it's all there. All the history there for you to see, and it's in a situation where you can see the individual transactions, which is a great place to be in identifying issues. So further on with the web-based solutions, this is a delegate report that comes out of cash management or transaction compliance, depending upon what the brand may call it. And this is looking at a group of cashiers that work in this location from the time period that you noted in the slide, June 10th to June 30th. And this is sorted by deletions before total, in a world where total deletions over 7% are concerning. So for this time period, you're seeing every cashier over 7%, and some are significantly over, with raised questions about what's going on in this restaurant with your cashier performance and some of your managers. So now we take the cashier trend from that slide, we select a cashier, and now we're looking at this single cashier work between June 10th and June 30th for that shift in that time span, which was June 28th. And she too is sorted by deletions, keeping in mind the goal here is 7% for her high end, and she's double digit for each of these days. that raises concerns. Do we have a new cashier? Do we have a theft opportunity, incentive, training issues? We need to understand that. And if we dial back to that shift code that I showed a few minutes ago, the time to get this stuff would be right here. Would be the first time that we saw that big problem. To get deep into what I was saying, improving this cause for concern in terms of the manager's understanding what this information is telling them and taking any kind of action. Again, then of course you see here studied on the cash shortage back in the 10th. Looking at this remotely, and you want to understand if that was taken care of or if it's been taken care of at the store level. So from the individual cashier trend, now we can drill down into the transactions from a specific day. And this is one of the great things that a web-based solution like cash management transaction clients do to see what is occurring and put it in terms of the context of the entire shift. This is a very critical data point for us. And we see highlighted here a dilution before $5.49 that occurred at 22:41, so 22:11 in the evening. We see the starting point, the deletion, and the ending point of the transaction. And it's relatively consistent with the deletion activity on this particular cashier. This coming from a cashier in a restaurant that's running about 3.5% over what their brand target was at the time. So here is a snapshot of that transaction. And it looks relatively innocent, but is it? It looks so. The assumption would be that the guest ordered number 7, deleted the number 7, changed their mind to the number 10 of what it looked like. I can tell you that what happened here, and what happened to the tune of $2,500 of theft in this individual, was that the guest gets to the window, presents the cash. This number 7 is deleted. In fact, the cash serves number 7. So you've got the product going out the window. You've lost $5.49 sales, and this manager in charge is $5.49 richer to the tune of $2,500 over nearly a 4-month period of time. So you can see the importance of looking at the data from a deletion standpoint and having the opportunity to look even deeper at a trend and then digging deeper still into the individual transactions. And this, because it was caught so late, incidentally, this stuff was caught through tracking ICOS variances and fraud percents over an extended period of time, which led to this investigation, which was quite timely and time-consuming. Here's an example of open discounting to $0. This particular brand doesn't use open discounting at this level. They do have a 20% discount that they offer for employees that are off duty. We use nearly a $8 discount. This is a late transaction, that is rather concerning. This would be something that you would address at the POS level. When banking the drawer out, and certainly if you're looking at the data on a daily or weekly basis at your restaurant's data. I'm going to introduce something that I use to monitor and identify theft, and this is to be really powerful. This is what I call the power of photometric tracking. And the screenshot you see in this slide is from our Coach software here at Delegate. And this is another example of how a web-based solution can really help red flag, help understand the data, and what's going on with your individual cashiers. And in this case, right here, you can see when Steve S. works, register, upsell hourly transactions decline 15%. That could be a trending issue, it could be a theft issue, but it alerts you to something that you need to do, some action that you need to take with this particular cashier. So on to the example of 7% of photometric tracking priority. The number I'm using here is 7% of sales for a location over time and for cashiers over time. And those photos we found in your numbers, whether you're manual tracking your numbers or on a dashboard of some sort. Your brand may vary. So let's assume deletions before at 5.5% and after at 0.2%. Discounts at 1%. Voice refunds and overring at 0.10%, and then cash over or short at 0.20%. You add all those numbers up, and we're going to get 7%. And I want to make the point here that cash over or short at 0.20% is very important because obviously the cash short may be cash taken. The cash over to that degree might be cash that was intended to be taken, but the person that's going to take it didn't have an opportunity to do that. So you want to monitor the ups and the downs of that cash number at 0.2%. So looking at a cashier or location or locations, we're going to look at several locations from an organization and compare them where they're at against those goals. So real quickly here, looking at the overriding numbers, keeping in mind the thresholds we were talking about with 0.10% of sales. And we see that as an organization, these restaurants are 2.5 times higher than that. And at 0.46, 0.35, even 0.29, 0.28, I can tell you without hesitation there's stuff going on in those two restaurants. And then the same with deletions. Keeping in mind that the goal is 5.7% in this illustration. Even if we take it to 7%, and the number that we used previously in looking at just deletions, they're significantly over both of those numbers here at 10.84%. And meals at 0.81, they're below that 1% threshold, but when you're looking at the individual numbers, you see what may be some abuse here at 1.26, 1.13. Because they're over the threshold, and then under the threshold. Also equally concerning, you may have some abuse going on here, your employees are eating and not bringing food and accounting for it properly. So that's very important to monitor in your data. They're closely on a daily basis and a weekly and period basis, quite frankly, as you're looking at your numbers. So without the cash component of this, that 0.2% that we talked about on the previous slide, this organization is at 11.9%. The cash is actually quite good. But just with these three components, they're in some serious trouble here from a success standpoint. It might not all be fast, it could be training and calibration, but I'm here to tell you there's stuff going on in this organization, and we've got some work to do here as well to bring that back into the fold and understand what's going on. So, where do we go from here? If we're looking at that previous slide, we've got some investigation to do. We've got to get to reviewing transactions. If you're not using some currencies to get a great time start, and understand what it looks like from the starting point over time, and a great way to send a message to the team that you're looking at that stuff and monitoring their performance. Reviewing schedules for common employees working. Review DVR footage. DVR footage is a great updated for you point. Understand who's working registered on DVR relative to what schedule looks like a routine assignment for that matter. Reviewing tender codes to make sure that they're properly trained, surprise cash audits. One thing that I neglected to point out earlier, that from an above store leader standpoint, ownership standpoint, it's great to create expectations with your team that you will, on occasion, unannounced, pop in and audit their cash to make sure that everything is correct. And keeping them on their toes that way is a great way to prevent loss and bouncing cash or missing cash that's been covered up for a period of time. Speaking with employees is a great data point. Granted, it is not a piece of paper or a report that you're looking at, but as you're casually talking to employees, especially newer employees, or the lower rank of your management team, shift managers, less experienced assistant managers, for example, you'd be surprised what they'll tell you when you ask them open-ended questions about what's going on in the restaurant. And they'll tell you things that are quite concerning from a test standpoint without even realizing what they're saying. So I would encourage you to make that part of your routine. and looking at your data and collecting data in your restaurants. And then setting goals and providing daily feedback to your team. So that brings us to the end of the data points, and I want to end by recapping what our goals were today and how we filled in some of those questions. So the first question is, what data type should I follow in order to prevent theft? We talked about web-based solutions, working best, manual certainly do work as well. It's a little bit more time-consuming. Cost of goods trends, POS trends, POS reports from the POS in the back-of-house system, whichever your brand uses. Following deletions, voids, and discounts. And cost of goods reports, your cost of beverage, your cost of paper, separately, and all of your product cost variances and your total cost. Again, over time, tracking this stuff from one period to the next is critically important from a prevention standpoint when there's what's going on in your organization or your restaurant. Why should it be part of every loss prevention plan? As I mentioned, the on-site concept charging removes the emotion from the performance. You have to believe what the numbers are telling you and take the personal part of the equation out of the situation and deal with that accordingly as you uncover the results of your investigation. Keep the team's eyes on what's really important, which is your team and your guests, better productivity, positive work environment. And then the final two questions here, how can the following the right metrics, safety, time, and money, addressing anomalies as they occur, tracking, addressing outliers, and addressing the issues before they go up, keeping you out of investigations and working on what's really important, as we mentioned earlier. And we covered off on this in our initial webinar that none of us on this call build conducting investigations into our routines. And when they come up, they're time-consuming and they have to take us away from our schedule. And as I said here in the previous cycle, what's really important is working with our team and spending time with our guests. And then what really hit home here, one organization that I work with reduced discount by 0.25%, which saves them in the range that they're at now, $300,000 a year in discounting from where they were when they started. They went from 1.28% to 1.3%, and that's significant saving just in discounting. And they continue to fight the integrity of the discounting on a daily, weekly, and yearly basis, but with systems in place looking at the data to work that as hard as we possibly can and keep that savings in place. Why data analytics play a key role in preventing theft? The name of the game is get the money into the register and then into the bank, right? That's what pays the bills, and that's why we're all here. Well-controlled POS metrics will increase your sales, reduce and prevent theft, increase your profits, and of course, positive work environment. With that, we come to an end of our webinar this afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining us and your time and attention, and we'll talk to you next time.